vulnerability that they do not now have when they get that capability. So I'm arguing here that the DPRK's security may be fatally compromised rather than enhanced by this capability that they are so dedicated to achieving. The third question: does the DPRK think that its current nuclear weapons capability, the ability to strike the Republic of Korea and Japan with ballistic missiles armed with nuclear weapons, will deter the United States and its allies from responding to provocations in the DMZ or at sea? The answer to that question, I think, possibly yes. They do think their nuclear weapons capability gives them this deterrent. I believe they are wrong if they believe that, but I think they may believe it. The United States and Russia have long experience, going back to the time of the United States and the Soviet Union, with nuclear weapons and with deterrence. But we know mistakes are still possible between us. The question here that I'm posing is, what does the DPRK think nuclear weapons are good for, besides deterring an enemy attacking them with nuclear weapons? Or, to put it differently, when is the threat of the first use of nuclear weapons by a state credible, particularly when that state is dealing with another nuclear weapons state? What good are nuclear weapons to the DPRK is the question. My answer is that they're only relevant, they're only useful when national survival is at risk. They're certainly not useful for small gains. They're not credible. They're not useful to protect them against a retaliation for incidents at the DMZ or at sea. But as it turns out, my answer really isn't very important. Kim Jong-un's answer is very important, and I worry that he may expect more of his new nuclear weapons capability than good appreciation for deterrence would warrant. Fourth question: does the DPRK think that if a new administration in Washington, and we're going to get one, begins by proposing talks about talks, negotiations, rather than immediately seeking tougher sanctions, do they believe that would be a sign of weakness? Answer: I think maybe. Let me be clear about my own view here. I would like to see the new administration in the United States that takes office in January of 2017, in consultation with the ROK and Japan. I would like to see that new administration pretty early on, maybe after a policy review, seek talks about talks with the DPRK, with only one condition, and that is that while they're talking, there be no tests of ballistic missiles or nuclear weapons, even at the very preliminary stage. Those of you who are very attentive on this issue will note that one of the candidates, Secretary Clinton, is being quoted as saying that's not what she would do. And I know some who advise her believe a different course would be more prudent, something I would call the Iranian model, where instead of seeking talks early on, you immediately seek tougher sanctions earlier on in order to create the right state of mind in Pyongyang. Show your toughness first so that talks would be a way of releasing that pressure. So that is an alternative view. It's not mine. I told you what mine would be. But this question is on the minds of those who will be in the next administration, and I believe it deserves thought and discussion, and I hope we can have some here. The fifth question: does the DPRK believe it can keep its nuclear weapons program, and still negotiate a peace treaty, the end of the US ROK exercises, and sanctions relief? In other words, does the DPRK believe it can take its nuclear weapons program off any negotiating table? I believe it isn't sure whether it could do that. I would note that some who are in this administration now certainly believe they meaning the DPRK, will never give up their nuclear weapons program. If we went around and we asked everybody here to comment on that, I dare say at least half of you would say they'll never give up their nuclear weapons program. I believe by saying that, you give the DPRK hope that they can keep it. My view is that we should destroy that hope. Explicitly, we should not settle for a freeze on their nuclear weapons program, unless the freeze were simply a step to denuclearization. To put this another way, I am opposed to talks with the DPRK if they take their nuclear weapons program off the table. I believe to engage in talks, and that they cannot, by agreement ahead of time, produce denuclearization, would legitimize the DPRK's nuclear weapons, and I am opposed to that. Sixth and final question: does the DPRK believe it can resist international pressure to improve its human rights behavior? As with the previous question, I believe the DPRK isn't sure it can get away with that. I can tell you from firsthand experience that they are concerned that the phrase improving human rights behavior is code for ending the Kim regime. Our position, I believe, should be the following: that we cannot address legitimate DPRK security concerns unless we ultimately reach a political settlement with the DPRK, and probably one that includes a treaty of peace. And since I believe that, I do not think, therefore, that a political settlement of that type, of that weight, is possible unless the DPRK adopts basic, internationally accepted standards on human rights. This does not mean they have to accept an American-style liberal democracy. It does not mean the end of their whole system. It does mean, over a period of time, substantial changes domestically. But I think that's the only way out of our current situation, by negotiation. Ladies and gentlemen, I am going to stop right there and assume that you all now will carry the weight. Thank you very much. I'm going to do
that. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get into Q&A session. Please, where's the microphone? Okay, hold on to this. All right. There was quite a succinct questions, number 6 through the other way around 1. Now, first track, Joe.
Thank you, Dr. Kim, for hosting this program, particularly with the Honorable Ambassador, who was my dean at School of Foreign Service, and it's an honor to participate in a program with Bob Bellucci. Despite the fact that he raised very, very perceptive and disturbing questions for those of us who don't live with this issue day after day, I found the answer to your first question, Bob, the most disturbing one, because it affects all the others. That is their perception of reality. It's one thing for regimes to disagree on motivations, ideology, that type of thing. But when we get down to raw facts, and your impression is they actually believe that certain facts did not occur when the rest of the world knows they did occur, then that means their grasp on reality is highly suspect. And therefore their motivation and their actions in the other context, the questions you raised, is quite, seems unpredictable and unbelievably dangerous. So I wonder, given the fact that you say they have this detachment from reality, how can we rely on expectations in any of the other areas when they don't see the world as the world is, not just the way as we see it, but the way it objectively is?
Joe, I don't dissent from your drawing that conclusion from my comment, right? In other words, I think this is not good news that their perception of reality is so much different from our perception of reality. I was really driving that question towards one sentence, and that they believe that they have been mistreated, they've been wronged by us over these years. So their characterization of this captures that, of the aggrieved party. I presented it, my own view, so you didn't confuse me with the DPRK. I don't share their view. But after having listened to them, and we didn't, by the way, spend a lot of time on history, because I didn't think it would be functional and be useful. But we spent enough time in Kuala Lumpur that I got the message, and you may know that 3 years ago, Steve Bosworth and I met with them, with now the new foreign minister in Berlin. So and we for a 2-day session, and I had the same impression then, that they're, you know, as we say, they're smoking their own stuff here. They really believe the characterization of history. What that should tell us is not that, in my view, not that we should not still try to engage them, but that we need to understand the many opportunities for misunderstanding, for purposeful misunderstanding, to be sure, at some point, but for honest misunderstandings too, and we need to be careful about that. If I don't get another chance, I'm going to say that we shouldn't, with the DPRK or a country like that, in which we have a history that is fraught, I don't think that the idea of trust makes a lot of sense for quite a long time. So if we make any kind of agreement, even tentative ones of some kind, we should be planning on monitoring and verifying, and we should not simply enter into any understanding with an expectation that everything will be fine. Everything between us and the DPRK will not naturally be fine. It's going to have to be made that way. So you took this as making the idea of Joe, the idea of engaging the North with this background as being especially challenging, and I think you're exactly correct.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. Always love to engage Ambassador on agreed frameworks. I love to debate that issue. But in your talk, I must say I agree with almost everything you say. I would put it a little bit differently, especially this last conversation. To me, the North Koreans over this long period have been very objective, very rational, very organized, very deliberate, from going from point A in 1984 to now, this long, long period of developing an impossible thing, a nuclear weapon, under the constraint of the U.S., the world, out to get them. And they're so close to doing it. Maybe they've done it, they haven't really demonstrated quite yet enough. So I'm thinking it's critical for us to see this short gap in which maybe a year or 2 or 5 years, they for themselves need to convince themselves first, and then the South, and then us, that they've got this capability. At that point, then I think you're right. They think that the game changes. Not quite yet, though. So I think we have a little bit of room to